Hey guys, tonight we slip through a narrow wooden doorway into a world far from our own, one where roofs sag under the weight of sodden thatch, where farm animals wander freely across dirt floors, and where your tiny family huddles together against a world of storms and sickness. No castles, no chivalry, just the raw reality of a medieval peasant's daily grind. If you thought your Wi-Fi cutting out was tragic, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Post your location and local time below. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake to the sound of chickens pecking at your wall. Not a clock in sight, but the rooster's got impeccable timing. You're lying on a straw mattress, maybe sharing it with your siblings, and yes, with fleas. The rush of morning cold bites through your woolen tunic, patched so many times it's more repair than cloth. The cottage you live in is a mix of mud and timber, roofed in thatch that leaks every time it rains. There's no chimney, so smoke from last night's fire still hangs heavy in the air, perfuming everything with a scent of ash and livestock. Your home shares space with your animals, a few chickens, maybe a pig, and, if your family's lucky, a scrappy cow all live under the same roof. They're not guests, they're lifelines. Their body heat helps warm the place during winter, and their noises are your medieval version of white noise. Historians still argue whether peasants ever truly got used to this cramped chaos, or if survival simply dulled their discomfort. But one thing's clear: comfort was never the priority. Function reigned supreme. Meals and chores blend together. Your mother stirs a pot of pottage, oats, beans, and cabbage stewing into the same mush you ate yesterday. Your father sharpens a wooden plow blade, muttering about the Lord's expectations, while a mouse scurries past his boot. The walls are smeared with soot and smudged with fingers, and they're not holding up very well. Rain has warped the wood and the mud chinks are crumbling. A draft whistles through the cracks. You sweep the dirt floor, yes, really, pushing crumbs and straw into the corner where the pig usually sleeps. No windows here, just tiny openings covered with oiled cloth or wooden shutters. Light is precious, and you often work in half darkness. Your only luxuries? Perhaps a carved spoon or a garland of dried herbs hanging above the hearth, both gifted or handed down across generations. Outside, the village is alive with movement. Children chase geese, women carry baskets full of weeds, called greens when you're optimistic, and old men mutter about the upcoming feast day. Your neighbors live in nearly identical cottages. It's a tight community, a place where everyone knows your name and your debt. Privacy doesn't really exist, but gossip does, and boy, does it travel faster than any messenger. Occasionally, you dream of something better. A house with stone walls and a tiled roof. Maybe somewhere warm where nobody shares their bed with a goat. But dreams are dangerous. They distract you from work. And in your world, idleness is punished, often with more work. Quirky tidbit? Some peasants used animal dung mixed with straw to reinforce their walls. Yep, your childhood home was quite literally held together with poop. Cozy. Despite the conditions, your body adapts. You develop calluses from working barefoot in the field, and your back bends early from hauling buckets and bundles. You learn which patches of the roof leak worst and sleep in the driest spot. Your nose knows when the pottage is gone sour. You become hyper-attuned to survival. Every creak of the cottage tells you something, whether it's a rat, a draft, or tomorrow's storm arriving early. And, oddly, there's a rhythm here. The constant noise of clucking hens and braying sheep, the familiar smell of damp straw and smoky breath, the daily cycle of labor and rest, all of it becomes the background music of your life. Would you trade it for modern plumbing and instant noodles? Maybe, but for now, this is your world.
You groan as your belly reminds you again that you're already behind on calories. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner, that's a luxury vocabulary. You eat when there's something to eat. And today, like most days, it's pottage. You drag your heels toward the fire pit where a bubbling pot releases a scent somewhere between boiled cabbage and despair. Your mother hands you a wooden bowl and a chunk of bread that could double as masonry. This is your meal, a lumpy mix of barley, beans, and a sprinkle of foraged greens. Some days, there's a wild onion, and if you're truly blessed, a scrap of salted pork. But meat is a rare guest at your table, so rare you once stared longingly at a squirrel for 10 full minutes before it escaped your judgmental gaze. The bread? It's dark, coarse, and painfully dense. You gnaw at it like a medieval beaver. Sometimes it's flavored with chalk or sand, additives to stretch the flour further. Historians still argue whether these gritty loaves contributed to the famously bad teeth of the peasant class, or if centuries of chewing on disappointment were the real culprit. There's no butter, no jam, no coffee, just ale. Yes, even in the morning. It's weak and murky, brewed at home or by the local wife with the least explosive batch. Water is risky business, untreated and teeming with surprises. Ale, on the other hand, has a mild preservative effect and enough calories to matter. A quirky detail? Children sometimes chewed on bones or leather strips just to pass the time and fight hunger. Hunger wasn't just a feeling, it was a whole personality trait in the village. You slurp the pottage. The warmth clings to your fingers, which haven't known a spoon that wasn't shared by at least 3 people. You savor it anyway. The bubbling sound, the steam against your face, the momentary comfort, it's the closest thing to luxury you'll get today. When your chores begin, you'll be hauling hay or weeding in the Lord's fields, those same fields you tilled last week. You work not just for your own table, but to satisfy obligations to the manor. And don't forget, your daily effort must cover food for the animals and repairs to the cottage. The paradox of peasant life: you're hungry, but you still feed everything else first. Your neighbor waves at you as she scatters breadcrumbs for the chickens. She's chewing on what might be roasted turnip, and yes, it smells like feet. Her husband once swore he saw someone fry a rat in desperation, though everyone still argues whether that was famine or just bad cooking. By mid-morning, your stomach growls again. It doesn't care that you ate. It cares that you live a life of constant undernourishment. Your muscles ache, not from exertion, but from lack of fuel. You dream of a feast, not even a grand one, Just something with flavor, spices, fat. But spices belong to nobles, merchants, and dreams. A traveling monk once passed through and spoke of cinnamon from lands so far you couldn't pronounce them. Your mouth watered at the idea. Cinnamon? You don't even have salt. Sometimes you sniff the air during feast days and wonder how it feels to taste joy. But there are tiny victories. The neighbor's cow birthed twins last season, and your family traded eggs for some milk, sweet, fatty, and worth remembering. You also dug up a rogue potato last month, even though it technically hadn't been discovered yet. Historians still argue whether that counts, or if it was just an aggressive turnip in disguise. Still, you endure. You laugh with friends as you share burnt crusts. You learn to love the subtle differences in stew textures. You even celebrate when someone figures out how to stretch flour with ground acorns. Sure, the acorns make your mouth itch, but hey, that's flavor. Every meal is a calculated act of survival, and while the menu may be grim, the company matters. You eat in circles, huddled together, sharing stories of ghosts, seasons, and dreams. Sometimes you trade a secret recipe that's really just pottage plus wishful thinking. You eye the pot again. It's still half full, but you'll save it for supper. You whisper a joke under your breath. Michelin-starred mud stew, anyone? Your mother chuckles. Humor helps the hunger go down.
You're hunched over. Fingers numb. Back aching from the weight of the morning's labor. And that's before the Lord's steward shows up. His boots crunch through the village path like they own the mud beneath them, which, technically, they do. You brace yourself. He's here to tally your dues. Again. You owe the Lord labor. At least 3 days a week in his fields. Today, he wants grain too. You gesture toward your dwindling supply, hoping he sees reason. He doesn't. You hand over a sack that was going to feed your family next week. He sniffs. Not full. You nod anyway. Arguing never ends well. Historians still argue whether this feudal exchange was slightly more fair in smaller manners, where lords occasionally shared surplus in times of famine. But here, you just pray he's in a good mood, and that his scribe doesn't record a penalty. Feudalism is your life's background app, always running, always draining. You're legally free, but bound to the land like weeds to soil. You can't leave without permission. And if you do, you're a runaway, hunted, fined, or even jailed. Not that leaving is tempting. The roads are perilous, filled with thieves, wolves, and nobles who ask questions like, "Whose peasant are you?" Your tasks shift depending on the season. Spring means planting barley, oats, rye. Summer, hoeing weeds from dawn to dusk. Autumn, harvesting what might already be claimed by the manor. Winter, repairing tools, thatching roofs, and praying you don't freeze before February. And while you work on your own plot to grow just enough to survive, the Lord's demands are prioritized. His land gets your best labor. Your field gets what's left of your energy. Some lords impose fines for poor harvest, missing tools, or, yes, marrying without approval. You once saw a woman punished for baking bread outside the communal oven. Unauthorized baking, they said, as if she were committing pastry treason. Still, there are moments when the system almost seems fair. Some lords offer ale on feast days, or let villagers forage mushrooms in their woods. A rare few might reduce labor if illness sweeps the village. And everyone talks about that one lord who let a family keep a goose. Legends, but you've never seen it. Quirky tidbit. One obscure manor rule required peasants to ask permission to bury their dead within certain boundaries. Bureaucracy didn't stop at the grave. You labor, haggle, and hope not to be noticed. Being seen might mean more work. Being invisible, that's survival. But it's not just the Lord you answer to. His reeve, the local enforcer, is a whole character himself. Usually another peasant elevated to power, which makes it worse. He understands your pain, but dishes it out anyway. He's the one who tells you your barley is not quality, your pigs are unruly, and your daughter's wedding cloth is too fancy. And yet he borrows your tools when his break. The manor court meets monthly, and you shuffle in with grievances and offerings. It's a mix of justice and theater. One neighbor argues over stolen chickens. Another is fined for defaming the reeve's hat. You watch quietly, grateful you weren't summoned. Historians still argue whether peasant women had any actual legal voice in these courts. Some manors allowed it. Others, women's testimonies were considered emotional and dismissed. Your mother only attends to whisper advice and eye the reeve's poorly stitched tunic. Through it all, you learn the art of quiet resistance. You undercount eggs. You stretch ale with water. You forget a chore on the Lord's field while tending your own. These aren't rebellions. They're survival maneuvers. Subtle, small, and mostly ignored. And at day's end, you return to your crumbling cottage, bones screaming, hands dirt-caked, and wondering whether tomorrow's toil might be lighter. Spoiler, it won't be. You mumble a joke to your sister. Maybe we should charge the Lord rent. Our sweat's worth something. She laughs until the baby cries and the roof leaks again.
You dust off your knees and make your way to the church, the only building in town that doesn't sag like a tired old mule. Its stone walls feel permanent, looming above the cottages and fields like it knows something you don't. Inside, candlelight flickers against cracked plaster, casting saints in shadow and angels in doubt. You kneel, your joints creak like the wooden pews beneath you. The floor is cold, worn smooth by generations of elbows and prayers. And though your stomach is louder than the sermon, you listen anyway. Because this, they say, is where salvation begins. The priest drones in Latin, an elegant language you don't understand, but pretend to absorb. You recognize the rhythms, the chants, the moments when everyone crosses themselves in unison. You mouth the words you know, Amen and mercy. The rest just sounds wrapped in holiness. Historians still argue whether village priests truly understood their own Latin sermons or simply performed rituals passed down by habit. Some were educated. Others, well, one priest in a nearby town accidentally baptized a pig. You glance at the altar. There's bread, wine, and incense, and not much else. But this place holds weight. It marks time. Sundays aren't rest days, they're obligations. Missing Mass can earn you a fine or public scolding, And since the church also controls marriage, burial, and confession, you try not to ruffle its feathers or its priests' egos. Outside, the bell tolls. It's not just sound, it's structure. It tells you when to work, when to worship, when someone's died. It divides your chaotic life into manageable slivers. Today's sermon: suffering is noble. You wince. That's easy for someone with shoes, but you nod along. Your soul depends on obedience. Heaven, they say, is the reward for enduring misery without complaint. So you sit straighter. Holiness might be your only upward mobility. Quirky detail: some villagers believed that sneezing during a sermon was a sign the devil was nearby. One old woman used garlic to keep herself sneeze-proof. You can still smell her from 3 pews away. After prayers, people gather outside to gossip under the guise of community. You hear about a wedding, a sick goat, and a child who saw an angel, or maybe just a goose with a shiny feather. You nod, smile, and offer the proper "God wills it" at the right pauses. You notice the priest speaking with the steward. You know what that means: tithes. You're expected to give 10% of your earnings to the church. Earnings? You laugh silently. You earn aches, sore feet, and boiled cabbage, but you still donate a handful of barley and some eggs, whispering a prayer that they won't count too carefully. The church is both burden and comfort. It demands much: time, goods, obedience, but it also explains the plague, the famine, and the aching unfairness of your world. It says God is watching, and He appreciates your endurance. Whether that's true or just strategic theology, well, historians still argue. The priest blesses your daughter. She clutches a dried flower and curtsies. You feel something fragile in your chest. Hope, maybe. It's thin, like the sunlight through stained glass, but you hold on to it anyway. At night, you replay the sermon in your mind. Not the Latin, but the feeling of belonging, of rhythm, of shared struggle. You whisper a prayer beneath your straw blanket, not for miracles, just for enough bread, fewer rats, and a dry morning. Your boots squish into the soaked road, which is less path and more mud obstacle course. The sky hangs gray and sulky, like it knows what kind of day you're about to have. You've been asked to visit a neighboring village, 2 miles away, through hills, puddles, and woodland that doesn't care if you survive the journey. You sling a sack over your shoulder. Inside, eggs for trade. Hopefully they arrive uncracked, unlike your spirits after you pass that cursed bend near Widow's Creek. People say spirits linger there, and last week your cousin swore he heard a donkey speaking Latin. Historians still argue whether this was hallucination, theology, or just a very learned donkey. You're walking because your feet are your only transportation. There are no horses for peasants unless you're incredibly lucky or secretly borrowing the Lord's. The road is narrow, unpaved, and occasionally disappears under overgrown brambles. You swing a stick ahead of you, mostly to swat thorny bushes, partially in case of bandits. Yes, bandits. The medieval version of pop-up ads. They appear without warning, demand your stuff, and might hit you with a rock.
You've heard stories, some exaggerations, some true. A merchant lost all his cloth to a gang disguised as monks. One girl fended off thieves by flinding turnips. You keep yours tucked away just in case. Travel is dangerous, not just because of people, but because of rules. You're technically not allowed to roam freely. Permission is needed, and someone always wants paperwork or coin you don't have. You stick to village paths and avoid major roads. Nobles patrol those, and they're not known for cheerful greetings. "Whose land are you from?" they bark, eyes scanning your sack like you're hiding contraband cabbage. Quirky tidbit: some villages used carved wooden tokens to mark safe passage between manors. Forget yours, and you're just a suspicious peasant with suspicious toes. You finally reach the hilltop where two fields meet. Beyond it, the other village glimmers, or rather, damply smolders in the distance. You're exhausted. The journey wasn't far, but it felt like you wrestled nature the whole way. Your feet are wet, your eggs are lukewarm, and a goose chased you for half a mile. You survived. Yay! Trading begins with nods and subtle eye contact. Everyone's cautious. You trade eggs for turnips and a piece of cloth that might cover a toddler's thigh. Fair enough. You swap gossip too. How your lord's steward is cheating weights. How someone's pig predicted a good harvest. Historians still argue whether pigs have prophetic tendencies, you joke. They laugh, not because it's true, because it's funny, and funny is rare. You're offered ale, brewed with nettles and regret. It's bitter, but you drink. You share a few bawdy tales. No one repeats them too loud. The priest's cousin is nearby, and he's the type who reports laughter to the clergy. The sun begins to droop. Time to head home. You retrace your steps, this time faster. You're tired, but you know the bends now. You whisper to the trees. Not prayers, just declarations. I'm not edible. I'm not rich. I'm just passing through. You arrive before nightfall, face and ankles stained with the road's bad attitude. Your mother claps her hands. Your eggs survived. Your brother eyes the turnips. He's already calculating their weight in soup. You hand over the cloth, which becomes a headband for your sister's doll. Victories come in small swatches. You realize something odd. You enjoyed the journey. Not because it was pleasant, but because it was different. Routine is survival. Adventure, if mildly terrifying, is spirit. You lean back, the road still pulsing in your feet. You whisper to the goose outside. Next time, I'm bringing a better stick.
You feel it before you see it. The air grows cruel, biting at your cheeks with a chill that smells like bare earth and dread. Winter has arrived. Not the postcard kind with jingling sleighs and cozy fireplaces, but the kind that gnaws at your bones and makes each breath feel borrowed. You stuff straw into the cracks of your cottage walls. It won't stop the cold, but it might slow it down. Your family's bundled in layers of wool and patchwork, hands forever hovering near the hearth. The fire sputters, wood is scarce, and you've burned half your furniture already, starting with that wobbly chair no one liked anyway. The livestock huddle inside again, uninvited but necessary. The pig is snoring, curled like a smoky loaf near the fire. The chickens roost overhead. You swear the cow farts in its sleep, which, under the circumstances, is oddly comforting. Winter's cruel symmetry, hunger and cold in constant competition. Your food stores dwindle. The turnips are soft, the grains gone musty, bread rationed into thin slices that wouldn't satisfy a squirrel. You sip weak ale, now more water than anything else, just to trick your stomach into silence. Historians still argue whether medieval winters were colder than today's due to the Little Ice Age periods. You're not interested in theories. You're interested in surviving without frostbite. Your boots, more hole than shoe, make each trip outside a negotiation with hypothermia. You chop firewood with frozen fingers, the axe handle splintered and slick. One slip, and you lose a toe or worse. You saw your cousin's hand last year after a misswing. He says the cold numbed pain. Lucky him. You pray nightly, not for comfort, just for fewer holes in the roof and more food in the pot. Your mother whispers, "We made it another day," like it's a spell keeping the frost demons at bay. Quirky tidbit? Some peasants heated stones in their fires and then wrapped them in cloth to use as primitive bed warmers. You've got one tonight. It smells like onion. Still better than nothing. You spend long evenings indoors, swapping stories. Some are real, some less so. Like the one about a knight who froze mid-sword swing and was found in spring perfectly preserved and forever scowling. Your uncle insists he saw it happen. You let him believe it. It helps pass the time. Clothes stiffen, water freezes in buckets, your breath fogs like ghost trails. The world narrows into hearth, blanket, and hope. Your body adapts. You walk faster. You layer better. You learn which side of the blanket traps the heat best. You learn to ignore the itch of straw and the ache of fingers. You become a creature of routine. Feed the animals, check the roof, warm the fire, sip the soup. Then one day the sun lingers just a little longer in the sky. You feel it, not warmth, just absence of aggression. The air's still mean, but it's tired. You step outside and hear water drip. Not ominous, not terrifying, just drip. And it feels like a victory song. You whisper to the wind, "Almost made it," like it's a secret between survivors.
You're leaning against the wooden fence, fingers dusty with flour you didn't steal but didn't exactly buy either. The village hums around you, not with bustle, but with whispers, sideways glances, and the subtle creaks of everyday defiance. You live by the rule book, except when you fold the edges. Neighbors gather like moths around gossip and survival tricks. You trade some flour for dried nettles, not legal, but necessary. The Lord's steward doesn't ask as long as his bread's thick and his bale cold. You give a knowing nod to the widow across the lane. She just boiled her laundry with herbs to trade the water as medicinal tea. Clever. Historians still argue whether this kind of barter economy undermined or sustained feudal control. One coin says rebellion, the other says resilience. You lean in as Mara, the village weaver, whispers about her latest act of rebellion. She dyed fabric with wild berries instead of approved madder. Her cloth came out streaked like twilight, flawed, bold, forbidden. She's selling it anyway. Why? Because it's warmer than wool and prettier than poverty. Quirky tidbit? Some peasants believed that planting onions during a full moon increased crop yield, but only if you whispered kind thoughts to the seeds. Your cousin sang love songs to his leeks. The leeks remained unimpressed.
You visit the miller's daughter with 3 eggs and a wink. She hands you flour and maybe a scandal. You didn't pay the Lord's toll to use the mill, but who did this week? Nobody admits it. Everyone benefits. Your quiet resistance isn't banners and fire. It's bent rules, sideways trades, and pretending you don't see the Reeves son sneak home with a forbidden chicken. You help each other, not because of politics, but because hunger is louder than law. You gather kindling with the neighbor's son. He tells you his father buried a squirrel statue as protection against the steward's visits. You nod seriously. Everyone plays this game differently. You help patch a roof with stolen thatch brought in from the edge of the woods. Technically manor property, they say. Technically stolen. You shrug. The roof no longer leaks. That's the verdict. Later, you bake bread using a borrowed recipe and someone else's firewood. You hum while kneading, soft tunes passed from one cottage to another. Songs have no owners here, just echoes. And in this blend of barter and boldness, you survive. No revolts, just small resistances, bent rules, sideways trades, and pretending you don't see the Reeves son sneak home with a forbidden chicken. You help each other, not because of politics, but because hunger is louder than law. You gather kindling with the neighbor's son. He tells you his father buried a squirrel statue as protection against the steward's visits. You nod seriously. Everyone plays this game differently. You help patch a roof with stolen thatch brought in from the edge of the woods. Technically manor property, they say. Technically stole them. You shrug. The roof no longer leaks. That's the verdict. Later, you bake bread using a borrowed recipe and someone else's firewood. You hum while kneading, soft tunes passed from one cottage to another. Songs have no owners here, just echoes. And in this blend of barter and boldness, you survive. No revolts, just small resistances, borrowed tools, traded jokes, patched roofs, and whispered moonlit onion compliments. You sit under the stars holding warm bread and warm secrets and feel the pulse of a community that plays the Lord's game on its own terms.
You stir warm water with a sprig of nettle and a wish, praying it helps your sister's cough. She's wrapped in 3 layers, cheeks flushed from fever, but still clutching her rag doll with its one eye and missing leg like it's holy. In your world, healing is mostly hope and habit. Babies are born wrapped in linens soft from years of use, delivered on dirt floors with midwives who know more about survival than anatomy. Your neighbor, Tomlin, just welcomed his 8th child. His wife birthed quietly in candlelight while her other kids fetched hot water and herbs. No hospitals, just courage, faith, and a mug of ale to dull the edges. And yet, joy blooms. New life in a place built of struggle feels like a miracle. You cradle the infant, tiny, soft, eternally fragile, and for a moment you forget the damp roof and leaky boots. Burials, on the other hand, are brutally common. A cold morning, a hand-dug grave. You wrap the body in shroud and prayers, the priest muttering Latin while the wind shivers through his robes. Death visits often, especially for children. Fever, flux, plague, or just hunger. God called them early, they say. You nod and swallow the pain like bad broth. quirky tidbit? Some peasants buried their dead with sprigs of rosemary, not just for scent, but because they believed it warded off spirits that might linger. Your sister insisted on adding garlic, just in case, she whispered. You watch a burial now, your cousin's child. The bells toll low, slow, like sighs across the village. The procession is modest. 3 neighbors, a priest, and the mother cradling a wooden toy in silence. You press a flower into the child's tiny hand before the shroud closes. Ritual is everything. Baptism, marriage, death, all bathed in firelight, song, and superstition. You remember your own baptism, barely more than a splash and a string of chants. Some say babies not baptized promptly risk wandering souls. Historians still argue whether this belief came more from doctrine or desperation. Faith offers structure. You light candles during illness, sprinkle salt across thresholds, and say blessings before eating barley mush. Even your mother's most bitter tea earns a whispered, "Thank you, Lord." You're not sure if it helps, but everyone does it, like brushing away fog before the morning's chores. Hope lives in whispers. You hear someone say the fever passed, someone say the baby smiled, someone say the winter will break early this year. You nod. If you repeat it enough, it becomes true. Life continues in spite of everything. Children play with sticks and stones, mimicking the Reeves lectures. Women giggle while laundering clothes, making fun of nobles. Someone sings, badly, but the melody carries. Someone jokes about naming their cow Death so the reaper spares it out of politeness. You laugh and cry and carry both in the same breath. At night, you kneel beside your sister and whisper a prayer. Not fancy, just let her wake up smiling. The fire crackles, the wind pauses, and for a moment, everything feels possible.
You cough once, then twice, casually at first, but your mother's eyes flash worry. She's seen this before. The Black Death doesn't knock. It barges in, silent and brutal, draped in fever and whispers. It starts with rats, scratching beneath the cottage floorboards, then flea bites that itch too much, then swelling in strange places. You try herbs, prayers, ale, even burying garlic at crossroads. Nothing works. The village begins counting coughs like rainfall. You hear that Widow Elra's son was found cold and still before sunrise. He'd been healthy yesterday. Elra screams for divine intervention, but the priest shrugs. God tests us, he says. You're not sure if faith helps, but you clutch it like a charm against chaos. The Black Death feels like war, but slower, sadder, and invisible. It spreads from neighboring villages, bodies carried on carts, funerals skipped, doors marked in chalk to warn others away. Historians still argue whether quarantine measures actually worked or just made people die alone. Your neighbor's cottage has gone silent. You peek through a crack. Empty bowls, overturned chair, no laughter. You don't knock. You keep walking. The village divides, healthy versus coughing. Every sneeze is an accusation. Some families lock themselves in with salted meat and whispered psalms. Others flee, though no one knows where safety is anymore. Away is just a prettier kind of fear. Quirky tidbit: some people tried strapping live chickens to their boils, thinking the birds would absorb the sickness. The chickens were less than thrilled. You remember seeing one peck a man who screamed, "I'm being punished twice." You brew herbs you barely understand. Sage, feverfew, and mystery leaves sold by a merchant with suspicious eyebrows. You drink them anyway. Your tongue goes numb. You consider that progress. Death comes fast, but not always. Some suffer for days. You help clean your cousin's sweat-soaked body, whispering stories from childhood while she drifts somewhere deep and far. She smiles once before silence swallows the room. The priest offers last rites so often his voice cracks mid-chant. He once burned a Bible page by accident during a ritual. Historians still argue whether that was divine warning or poor candle placement. You sit beneath a tree later, staring at the sky through leafless branches. It's a strange calm. No birds, no laughter, just the ache of absence. And still you survive, somehow. The plague skips your cottage, maybe mercy, maybe chance. You scrub everything with vinegar, even your doll's fabric limbs. You hang rosemary at the door and burn wet cloth to mask the stench of fear. You don't speak of luck. That's dangerous. Instead, you nod at the living and bow for the lost. The village reshapes, smaller, but still breathing. Babies cry again. Chickens cluck. You exhale without guilt. And every so often, you whisper thank you to the wind, unsure if it's God or just good fortune catching your breath.
You tug at your collar, eyeing the angry red spot on your cousin's neck and the mysterious rash spreading across your brother's arm. A healer was summoned, but healer is a generous term. She's 70, wears 12 shawls in all seasons, and believes mold is a sacred ingredient. She arrives clutching bundles of herbs and a jar of something that smells suspiciously like regret. Her remedies are a mix of old wives' tales, folk magic, and questionable fermentation. You hold still while she rubs onion on the swollen lump. "It'll draw out the sickness," she mumbles. You're more concerned it's drawing out the flies. You drink tea made from powdered bark and moss scraped off the shady side of the church. It's bitter enough to convince you it's working. Historians still argue whether medieval remedies provided genuine medicinal benefits or just taste bud trauma. You're leaning toward trauma. Medicine is based more on ritual than science. The healer burns rosemary and waves a feather near your forehead. "Bad humors," she says. "That's medieval for, you probably should drink less ditch water." There are no doctors here, just local wisdom wrapped in mystery and a dash of superstition. Quirky tidbit? One common remedy for fever involved wearing a necklace made from dried toads. Toads, apparently, were considered absorbent. You decide you'd rather keep the fever. Bloodletting is another option. Your uncle swears by it. The healer uses a blade so dull it apologizes with every cut. You sit through it, clutching your doll and bargaining with fate. Later, you pass out. Possibly from relief, possibly from blood loss. The village only trusts healers if they're old, mysterious, and smell like the woods.
Younger ones, like that boy who once tried to treat a cough with snail syrup, are still laughed at. Even the Reeve called him Sir Slime. You learn to identify plants by color and mood. St. John's wort for sadness, dandelion for digestion, and mugwort because it just sounds powerful. Some work, most make you feel like you licked a haystack, but feeling something is better than nothing. When sickness gets worse, you try everything. Fasting, chants, burying shoes under the hearth. One child once claimed sneezing backward would cure the plague. He tried. He broke his nose. The church offers spiritual healing, confession, communion, and occasionally holy water splashed liberally across forehead and floor. You blend faith with folk medicine, praying your body forgets it's sick. And sometimes it works. You wake, fever faded, stomach still sour, but breath easier. Your mother calls it a miracle. You call it a mossy victory. You stitch a small pouch of herbs to wear around your neck. Thyme, lavender, and dried bits of the healer's mystery root. Protection, they say. Whether from illness or bad jokes, you're not sure. And even when cures fail, care remains. People sit by your side, hold your hand, whisper comfort, and clean your linens. The healer might be wrong, but she's there, and that, somehow, matters most. You rest tonight beneath that itchy blanket, with a necklace of thyme and a belly full of bark tea. Safe-ish, alive, loved.
You dig your toes into warm dirt, humming a tune that doesn't quite have words, just rhythm. It's early summer, and while the sun presses heavy on your shoulders, the field feels like a stage. You hoe, harvest, and half-dance between furrows like the soil owes you a round of applause. There's joy here, not luxury joy, no feasts, jewels, or feather beds, but the smaller kind. A chicken lays 2 eggs instead of 1. Your friend snorts ale through his nose after a joke about the Reeve's unfortunate haircut. Your sister stitches a tunic using thread dyed with elderberry. It ends up bluish-purple. She calls it royal mud. You laugh so hard you drop your rake. You sing while sowing beans. The melody zigzags through wind and weeds, echoed by a neighbor harmonizing on accident. Sometimes you shout the songs off-key and on purpose. Humor is currency here, and you spend it generously. Even the animals seem amused. One goose honks along like it's the chorus. Yet beneath the giggles and gardening, burdens swell. Your mother worries your father won't return from the wheat fields. He's been gone 3 days, and the manor demanded twice the labor this season. You whisper quiet assurances, but inside you wonder if the road swallowed him, like it did your cousin last year. Your youngest sibling bruises easily. You think of the strange rash that hasn't faded. The healer shrugs. Time might fix it or not, she says, waving a feather like hope. You bundle herbs and keep watch. Historians still argue whether peasants truly found happiness amid hardship or if storytelling gave them the illusion of peace. You think joy is real. It just arrives in smaller packages. A dry roof, a plump turnip, a hug during harvest. Quirky tidbit? Some villagers celebrated the summer solstice by jumping over fires, believing they'd leap into good fortune. You tried it once. Landed in a goose nest. The goose won that round. You return to work, arms aching, mind wandering. You dream of brighter cloth, thicker soup, fewer blisters. But you also dream of dancing barefoot in fresh-cut hay, laughing until someone calls you ridiculous. You don't mind. Ridiculous feels better than hungry.
Your friend appears beside you. He's carrying 3 eggs and a grin so wide it might be dangerous. He says, "Double yolks." You gasp dramatically. "We feast like kings." And though there's no meat, no spices, no tablecloth, it feels like a banquet. Later, you sit by the fire, telling stories of rogue pigs, haunted bread ovens, and that time the reeve mistook sheep for bandits in fog. You laugh until your stomach hurts, hunger forgotten for a while. And tomorrow, you'll hoe again. You'll joke again. You'll stretch smiles over sore shoulders like patched wool. Because in this patch of world, where sorrow seeps into the soil, joy still grows. You just have to notice it.
You rub the last of your crumb-covered fingers against your tunic, eyeing the chipped wooden bowl beside you. It held barley pottage just hours ago, your meal, but now it's empty, except for a few smears that scream, "Scraped clean." You sigh. The church got your best grain yesterday, and the steward demanded firewood this morning. Your belly? It got barley. Tithes are relentless, 10% every time, no matter how you calculate it. You gave the priest your barley, eggs, and whatever dignity you had left. God's portion, he called it, smiling like he hadn't tasted thin soup in years. He blesses you and walks off with food your sick brother could have eaten. Meanwhile, tolls circle around your life like gnats. The mill charges for flour. The Lord taxes the communal oven even when you're baking scraps. There's a fee for crossing the bridge, which is more whole than wood. You laugh when the reeve mentions standard policy. It's not standard, it's scavenging. Historians still argue whether tithes ever reached the Vatican or just puffed up local clergy robes and bell towers. You suspect it bought at least one velvet bookmark. You remember when your father tried paying the toll with firewood instead of coin. They took the wood and fined him for disrespect. You were 10. You promised not to cry. You did anyway. Quirky tidbit: some peasants painted fake mold on their bread to avoid giving it away as part of tithe. The priest once bit into a spoiled loaf and claimed divine punishment mid-chew. You still quote him during meals. Still, faith is woven into your world. You give even when it hurts. You kneel after giving. You whisper prayers that sound more like bargains. You light candles with wax scraped from old offerings. It's not devotion, it's desperation wrapped in ritual. Your sister asks why you keep offering eggs when your hand barely lays. You say, because everyone else does. She calls it herd holiness. You smirk. She's not wrong. You pass the church again later. A new stained glass piece glitters faintly. Saints with glowing halos, donated by the merchant who never pays tolls. You feel a mix of awe and indigestion. Beauty, bought with barley. That night, a neighbor shares his theory. If we all gave up tithes, maybe God would strike the tower. You laugh. Maybe he'd strike us for being cheeky. Then you share your last turnip, and it feels sacred. Because even when the system bleeds you, you still gather around firelight, swap sacrilegious jokes, and hold hands during feast days. You endure the tolls, you tolerate the tithes. You survive not in spite of them, but somehow within them. You sit cross-legged under a crooked tree, twirling a straw in your fingers as you recall that day, the one that shimmers in memory like a dream, wrapped in road dust and marbled stone. That time you saw the castle. It began with a summons. Well, not a royal one. More like, "Come hold sacks while we tax the village." You were one of 3 selected to accompany the steward to court, carrying offerings, grain, eggs, and prayers whispered through gritted teeth. You walked for hours, past familiar mud paths into the wider unknown, where the road improved slightly, as if afraid to offend nobility. Your boots stuck to the softened track, but you were too distracted by thoughts of silk and swords. And then, there it was, rising like storybook pride. The castle didn't shimmer, but it loomed, stone stacked upon stone like it dared gravity to object. Massive gates, carved parapets, banners snapping in the wind. You gawked, you grinned, you nearly dropped the barley. Inside, the halls felt bigger than your entire village. Ceilings so high they had their own altitude. Floors polished smoother than your best wooden spoon. Torches flickering against tapestries depicting battles, banquets, and saints. You thought, this is how clouds feel when they decide to live indoors. Historians still argue whether peasants ever truly entered castle halls, or if they mostly stayed near stables and courtyards. But you did. You saw it. You felt its polished arrogance beneath your calloused feet. A quirky tidbit? Castles sometimes had garderobes, toilets that emptied straight into moats. You nearly stepped into one before the steward barked, "Not that room." He saved your life. And your dignity. You noticed the noble children chasing a falcon through a side hall, dressed in velvet that caught the light like a secret. You imagined yourself among them, but your tunic smelled like onions and pig. You tugged your hood lower. You delivered your goods. The steward bowed. You did too, awkwardly and late. No one looked at you. Not really. You were part of the furniture. Useful, invisible, forgettable. When the steward presented the village's gifts, he used words like generous and loyal. You almost laughed. Generous? You gave under threat. Loyal? You stayed because your legs were too tired to leave. They served food. Not for you, of course. But you saw trays of roasted meats, golden bread, fruits that looked invented just for royalty. You stared until a guard coughed politely, then sternly. You backed away. Outside again, the air felt thinner. You held your empty sack. Nothing had changed, except your imagination. You saw a world where luxury wasn't earned, just inherited, where comfort didn't have to be bartered for, where people bathed with soap that smelled like flowers instead of regret. On the walk home, you were quiet, not from sadness, but from processing. You knew now. You knew that your world was built to support theirs. Your hunger padded their comfort. Your labor polished their floors. But you also knew this. You saw them. You were real. You were present. And you had stories now. That night, around the fire, you regaled your siblings with descriptions of falcons, fountains, and fancy food. You exaggerated just a little. The fountain sang, the falcon bowed, the bread glowed. Laughter filled the cottage. You whisper to your sister, "I saw a castle." She gasps, like it's a holy vision. Maybe it was. Maybe seeing the castle didn't change your status, but it changed your lens. And sometimes Perspective is its own kind of power.
You stare into your bowl, swirling the thin soup with a stick just to trick your brain into believing it's stew. Hunger has a personality now, loud, sarcastic, and constantly demanding more. You sigh and plan your next culinary crime: moss flour pancakes. That's right. You've scraped moss off shaded tree bark, dried it, crushed it, and mixed it with your dwindling stash of grain. It's barely edible, but it bulks up the dough and gives it a delightful crunch of mild regret. Your mother raises an eyebrow as you serve them. "Why does this taste like a forest argument?" she asks. You shrug. You've grown clever. Rats, once feared intruders, are now candidates for dinner. You set traps baited with leftover pottage, which feels criminal, considering pottage is basically flavored mud. You've caught 3 rats this week. You roast them over low flame, joking they're marshland chicken. Your brother gags, then takes a bite. Historians still argue whether peasants commonly consumed rodents, or if these meals were famine-specific and erased from proud oral histories. Let's just say you're not writing a cookbook. You're writing survival notes on the back of turnip leaves. Quirky tidbit: some starving villagers made paste from boiled animal hides, candles, boots, and even old harnesses, and scraped the jelly-like residue into bowls. You tried it once. Smelled like boiled barn and sadness. Your creativity expands with your hunger. You soak breadcrumbs and knead them with crushed beans, shape them into meatballs, then call them ghost sausage. Your sister claps at the name, not the taste. Still, the illusion is nourishment. You forage aggressively: nettles, wild garlic, thistle roots, and anything the sheep haven't already rejected. You once mistook a clump of poisonous berries for jam berries. You didn't die, just hallucinated that your rake was whispering compliments. The healer offers advice: eat slow, chew long, think warm thoughts. You chew for 27 minutes and mentally hug soup. Doesn't help much, but you now associate soup with affection. Your teeth complain. They weren't built for moss flour, stone bread, or bitterness baked at 400 degrees of despair. One molar cracks mid-rat bite. You spit it out and name it Sir Choose-a-Lot. Humor helps. You dream of feast days, times when the whole village gathers and the Lord offers little meat. You once tasted goose at a Michaelmas celebration. It changed your life. You still write songs about that goose. You named it Golden Drip. You cried when they ate it. Then you ate it too. You barter: a woven pouch for some dried peas, a story for 2 small apples. You tell a merchant your moss pancakes cured your cousin's hiccups. He trades you garlic. Your cousin never had hiccups. She's too hungry to hiccup. You stretch everything. Soup becomes stew. Stew becomes paste. Paste becomes story. You never eat alone. You eat in groups, sharing scraps, laughter, and creative lies. Someone jokes about catching clouds to flavor stew. Someone else suggests boiling shadows. At night, your belly grumbles. You whisper, "Tomorrow, moss pancakes with extra sarcasm." Your brother mumbles, "Tell the moss to bring friends." And despite everything, rats, cracked teeth, and soup pretending to be food, you sleep, not full, but fed enough to try again tomorrow. You wake to your usual routine.
one eye open, one knee already sore. The sun peeks through the patched cloth window, like it's judging your ambition. But you rise, again. Because that's what peasants do. Not with glory, but with grit. You clamber out of bed, stiff from yesterday's labor, hungry from last night's soup, which was 60% water and 40% optimism. There's a sense of quiet urgency, not panic, just the push of survival whispering, "Get moving." You do. Your mother hands you a tattered satchel. Inside, a pittance of grain, 2 onions, and hope. You're off to patch the roof, mend a fence, maybe trade moss if someone's in a whimsical mood. Your journey begins not on roads, but in routines. You feed the chicken, still bitter it wasn't part of yesterday's stew, sweep the dirt floor, and check your boots, still more whole than leather. You wrap your feet with cloth and prayer. The Lord's steward passes through, snorting at your efforts. You nod, say blessings, and return to work. Resistance isn't loud. It's staying calm when insulted, fixing what's broken without permission, and surviving on crumbs laced with sarcasm. You barter with the miller's wife, your carved spoon for 2 apples. She grins. One's half rotten. You nod like it's gold. Hunger teaches you diplomacy. Historians still argue whether such daily negotiations constituted rebellion or merely adaptation. You argue they're necessary theater, acts performed under muddy skies. Quirky tidbit? One peasant swore by keeping a pet squirrel named Bartholomew as good luck, until Bartholomew bit the steward's nephew. The squirrel mysteriously vanished. You patch roofs with borrowed straw, stitch tunics with thread spun from wild plants, and fix fences using knots passed down from a grandmother who once tied everything from chickens to debts. You bend, twist, adapt, endure. And through it all, you share. Stories, food, warmth, jokes. You remember the time the pig escaped during Mass. The priest called it divine interruption. You called it brilliant entertainment. You carry no banners. You raise no swords. You raise children, pigs, hopes. Sometimes eyebrows when someone suggests using nettle paste for toothpaste. You're a peasant, but you're the spine of society. You whisper to your sibling, "We wake, we work, we laugh." She nods, eyes tired, but lips smiling. You both survived the plague, the winter, the Lord, the soup. That's enough. At the end of the day, your hands ache, your belly growls, but your spirit hums a quiet tune, not of glory, but of persistence. You didn't revolt, but you resisted by surviving. You exhale into dusk, watching smoke curl from cottages stitched together by mud and willpower. Because your victory isn't loud. It's waking up again and again.
So now you curl under your scratchy blanket, listening to the soft crackle of the fire and the sleepy squawks of that one rooster who never learned time. Outside, the wind hushes as if tiptoeing past your window, careful not to disturb this fragile peace. Your world is small, but its echoes stretch wide, built on labor, laughter, and quiet resilience. There are no songs written about your name, no statues carved in your image, but the land remembers your footsteps. The soil holds your story, and the stars blink knowingly above. Let your breathing slow. Let the shadows settle. Let your aches dissolve into the straw beneath you. You've carried burdens all day, all life, but for now, let go. The walls may be thin, but they've held you. The food may be humble, but it's fed you. And your community, scrappy and stubborn, has always stood beside you. Tomorrow comes early, but tonight belongs to you. Sleep deeply, dream gently, and remember, you endured, you adapted, and you matter.